The town of Fairview was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Nestled between rolling hills and endless farmland, its biggest excitement was the county fair or the occasional high school football rivalry. But tonight, that peaceful existence would shatter. Kyle Mercer, a mechanic at Joe's Auto Repair, wiped the grease off his hands and locked up the shop for the night. He glanced at his phone, 9:17 p.m. The streets were mostly empty, aside from the neon glow of Lou's Diner down the block and the flickering streetlight outside the gas station. The night was quiet, eerily so. A scream cut through the silence. Kyle's head snapped toward the sound, coming from the direction of Miller's grocery store. He saw a man stumbling out, clutching his neck, blood gushing between his fingers. Behind him, a figure emerged, a woman, but something was wrong. Her body moved in jerky, unnatural motions, and her mouth was smeared with red. "Help me," the injured man gasped, before collapsing face-first onto the pavement. The woman lunged, teeth sinking into his back with a sickening crunch. Kyle froze. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. But then, as if the town itself had been waiting for this moment, all hell broke loose. More screams echoed from different parts of town. Shadows darted through the streets, people running, chased by others who moved with that same unnatural, predatory hunger. A woman burst out of a house across the street, her face twisted in terror, only to be tackled to the ground by a snarling figure. Blood splattered onto the sidewalk. Kyle took a step back, heart pounding. "Get inside," a voice shouted. He turned to see Rachel Carter, the owner of Lou's Diner, holding the door open. A few people had already rushed inside, their eyes wide, their breaths ragged. Kyle didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the street, the sounds of more guttural growls closing in behind him. Inside the diner, the door slammed shut, and Rachel locked it. "What the hell is happening?" someone panted. "It's them," an old man named Bill muttered, gripping a shotgun. "They're back." Kyle looked at him. "Back? What do you mean back?" Bill's eyes darkened. "This town, it's seen something like this before. A long time ago." Kyle didn't have time to ask more. Outside, the streets were filling with them. Dozens, maybe more, wandering in search of prey. The night of blood had begun. Kyle's chest rose and fell rapidly as he pressed his back against the counter. The low hum of the diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, eerily calm against the chaos outside. Through the glass windows, shadows staggered under the street lamps, dozens of them. Their bodies twitched, their heads jerked unnaturally, and their eyes, empty. "Jesus," someone whispered. Rachel peeked through the blinds, her face pale. "We can't stay here." The others, 7 in total, exchanged nervous glances. Aside from Rachel, Kyle recognized Bill, the grizzled old hunter clutching his shotgun. There was Sarah, a college student who had been working the late shift, and Tommy, a 16-year-old delivery boy who still had his apron on. An older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks, huddled in the corner, whispering to each other. The last was a stranger, tall, with a rough, weathered face and a pistol on his hip. "Who the hell are you?" Kyle asked, eyeing the gun. The man smirked. "Name's Dawson. Just passing through. Guess I picked the wrong town." "Guess we all did," Kyle muttered. A sudden bang against the window made everyone jump. A bloody hand smeared across the glass. Then another. And another. The creatures outside groaned, sensing fresh meat inside. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, voice trembling. "Where?" Rachel countered. "Town's crawling with those things." Bill grunted. "The fire station's got an armory. Could be weapons there." "Too far," Dawson said. "We'd never make it without getting torn apart." Kyle thought for a moment. "What about Miller's Hardware?" "It's just 3 blocks down. We could grab supplies, maybe weapons, and figure out a way out of town." "Assuming there's anything left," Rachel pointed out. A loud crash cut through the conversation. One of the creatures had slammed itself against the glass door. Its face was mangled, flesh hanging from its cheek, its mouth filled with blackened, rotting teeth. It let out a guttural snarl, its fingers clawing at the door. More pressed against the windows, their numbers growing. The glass wouldn't hold much longer. "We move now," Dawson said, pulling his pistol. "Or we die here." No one argued. Rachel grabbed a baseball bat from behind the counter, while Kyle snatched a butcher knife from the kitchen. Bill pumped his shotgun with a sharp click-clack. They had to be fast. Because the monsters outside were getting hungrier. The glass door cracked under the relentless pounding. The creatures outside moaned, their decayed fingers scraping against the surface, their dead eyes locked onto the survivors. It wouldn't hold much longer. "Back door," Rachel hissed. Everyone moved at once. Kyle led the way toward the rear exit, gripping his butcher knife so tightly his knuckles turned white. Sarah and Tommy followed close behind, the boys breathing ragged. Dawson took up the rear, his pistol raised, eyes scanning for movement. Bill yanked the back door open, revealing the alley behind the diner. It was dark, save for the flickering light of a distant street lamp. Trash cans were overturned, and the stench of rotting food mixed with something worse, something foul, like decayed meat left out in the sun. Kyle hesitated. "What if they're out here too?" "Then we don't stop running," Dawson muttered. They bolted into the alley. The night air was thick with the sound of distant screams, gunshots, and the sickening wails of the undead. The town was collapsing, and they were right in the middle of it. As they reached the end of the alley, Kyle skidded to a stop. The main street was a war zone. Cars had crashed into one another, storefronts were shattered, and bodies, both human and inhuman, littered the pavement. And there were more of them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, stumbling between the wreckage, feasting on the fallen. Tommy gagged. "Oh my God." "Stay quiet," Rachel whispered. They ducked behind an abandoned truck. The plan was simple: cross 3 blocks to Miller's Hardware, get supplies, and figure out a way to survive. But nothing about this night was simple. Dawson glanced around. "We cut through the old laundromat. Should be clear." Bill nodded. "Then move." They darted across the street, weaving between abandoned cars, careful not to make a sound. Then Tommy tripped. His body hit the pavement with a thud, sending an empty beer bottle rolling into a storm drain. The nearest creature's head snapped toward them. A moment of silence. Then it let out a screech, loud and inhuman. The others turned. Dozens of them. "Run!" Dawson barked. The group sprinted toward the laundromat as the horde charged, their snarls growing louder. Kyle shoved through the broken door, the others following. Rachel slammed it shut behind them, locking it, just as the first creature smashed into it. The glass cracked but held. For now. Breathing heavily, Kyle turned to the others. "We're running out of time." Bill reloaded his shotgun. "Then we'd better make every second count." But before anyone could speak, a sound came from the darkness of the laundromat. A low, guttural growl. They weren't alone. The growl echoed through the laundromat's darkness. Kyle's pulse hammered in his ears as he raised his knife. Rachel gripped her baseball bat, while Bill slowly leveled his shotgun. The others stood frozen, barely breathing. Then the thing stepped into view. It wasn't like the others. The regular infected were mindless, shambling husks, but this one moved differently, deliberate, hunched low, muscles tensed. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, its mouth curled in a permanent snarl, black veins pulsing along its neck. And its eyes weren't empty. They were filled with hunger. Kyle barely had time to react before it lunged. Bill fired. The blast of the shotgun roared through the laundromat, the creature recoiling as buckshot tore into its chest. But it didn't fall. It barely staggered. "Oh, hell no," Dawson muttered. The creature shrieked and sprang forward with unnatural speed. Dawson fired his pistol, 2 shots to the head. The bullets snapped its head back, but still, it kept coming. Kyle didn't think. He grabbed a broken metal laundry pipe and swung with everything he had. The pipe cracked against the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. It dropped to its knees, momentarily stunned. "Hit it again!" Rachel shouted. Kyle did. Again and again, until its head was a pulpy mess on the tile floor. Silence followed, except for their ragged breathing. Tommy wiped his face, hands shaking. What the hell was that? Bill knelt beside the body, examining the wounds. "This ain't normal." Kyle scoffed. "No kidding." "No," Bill said, voice grim. "I mean, this thing, it was already dead before we killed it." Kyle frowned. "What are you talking about?" Bill pointed to the exposed bone near its shoulder. "See this? These ain't fresh wounds. Something got to it before it turned." Rachel paled. "You're saying something else is out there?" Bill nodded. "And it's been here longer than tonight." Dawson stood, reloading his pistol. "We don't have time to figure this out now. We still need to get to the hardware store." Kyle agreed. They had wasted enough time. They slipped out the back of the laundromat, the distant groans of the horde still echoing from the streets. They moved fast, ducking between alleyways and abandoned cars. Miller's Hardware was just a block away now. But as they rounded the corner, they all stopped cold. The street ahead was drenched in blood. Bodies, some human, some not, were ripped apart, limbs scattered across the pavement. But there were no infected feeding on them. They had been killed by something else. Something bigger. Rachel whispered the question on all their minds. If the zombies didn't do this, what did? No one had an answer. But they were about to find out. The smell of blood hung thick in the air. Kyle covered his nose as he stepped over the shredded remains of what had once been a person. The corpse's ribcage was split open, like something had torn through it. But it wasn't just one body. There were at least a dozen, scattered across the street like discarded dolls. Rachel turned pale. This wasn't the infected. Dawson knelt beside a body, running his fingers over the jagged wounds. No human did this. No animal either. Bill exhaled slowly. "I told you. This town has seen this before." Kyle turned to him. "What do you mean?" Bill didn't answer immediately. His grip on the shotgun tightened. Back in '78, people disappeared. Not just one or two, dozens. Whole families. No signs of struggle, no bodies, nothing. The sheriff at the time told everyone to stay indoors, but my father, he knew something was wrong. He told me that Fairview ain't right. It never was. Kyle frowned. "You're saying this has happened before?" Bill nodded. "And I think the people who vanished didn't just disappear. They changed." He glanced at the mangled corpses. "Into whatever the hell did this." The group fell silent. Then Sarah gasped. "Guys, look." She pointed at the nearby wall of an old brick building. It was covered in writing, black, jagged letters smeared across the bricks in what looked like dried blood. Kyle swallowed hard as he read the words aloud. "The night of blood returns." Underneath, a message had been scratched deep into the wall, as if someone had carved it with their bare hands. They never left. A chill ran down his spine. "We need to move," Dawson muttered. No one argued. They sprinted the last block to Miller's Hardware, Kyle kicking the door open. Inside, the store was dark and dusty, shelves filled with tools, hunting gear, and, thankfully, guns. Dawson went straight for the weapons. Jackpot. Bill grabbed a handful of shotgun shells while Rachel and Sarah loaded up on knives and flashlights. Kyle found a crowbar, tucking it into his belt. Tommy peered through the window. His voice was barely a whisper. Guys?" Kyle turned. "What?" "They're coming." Outside, through the cracked window, the street had gone silent. The infected weren't shambling anymore. They stood still, like statues. Watching. Then, from the alleyway across the street, something moved. Not a zombie. Not human either. It was tall, too tall, its limbs elongated, its skin pale and stretched tight like leather. Its hollow eyes locked onto them, and its mouth slowly curled into a twisted grin. Then it charged. The glass shattered. The night of blood had truly begun. Glass exploded inward as the creature crashed through the front window. Kyle dove behind the counter, barely dodging the thing's unnaturally long claws. It was fast, faster than anything they had faced before. Its twisted grin never wavered as it lunged toward Tommy. Boom! Bill's shotgun roared, blasting the creature's shoulder. It staggered but didn't fall. Rachel swung her baseball bat at its head, but the thing caught it mid-air and snapped it in half like a twig. She stumbled back, eyes wide. Dawson fired his pistol, 2 quick shots. One hit its chest, the other grazed its temple. The thing barely reacted. Head for the back. Kyle yelled, grabbing Tommy by the arm. The group bolted toward the storage room, but the infected outside had heard the noise. More were swarming toward the store, clawing at the walls, their moans growing louder. Kyle kicked open the back door, only to freeze. Another creature stood there. It wasn't just one. There were 3. Tall, thin, grinning. Waiting. Kyle's stomach dropped. We're trapped. The first creature leapt forward. Bill fired point blank, blowing a hole through its chest, but it kept coming. Its clawed hand swiped across Bill's gut. Bill gasped, stumbled. Blood soaked his shirt. No! Rachel screamed. Dawson grabbed a hatchet from the shelf and charged, swinging wildly. The blade buried itself in the creature's neck. It snarled, stumbling backward, long enough for Kyle to react. He grabbed a can of lighter fluid and hurled it toward the nearest shelf. Rachel, matches. She caught on fast. She snatched a matchbook from the counter, striking one against the wall. Kyle locked eyes with the creature, rage and terror coursing through his veins. Burn in hell. Rachel flicked the match. Whoosh. The flames caught instantly, spreading across the shelves. The fire engulfed the creatures, their twisted grins finally turning into screams. The infected outside howled as the flames illuminated the store like a beacon. Kyle grabbed Bill, pulling him up as he groaned in pain. We're getting out of here. Through the smoke and chaos, they pushed forward, bursting through the side door. The creatures shrieked behind them, the fire swallowing the store. They ran. The town burned around them. The infected swarmed the streets, but something was changing. The fire, the light, seemed to weaken them. The creatures howled in pain, their skin blistering in the glow. Kyle didn't stop. He didn't look back. He just ran. They reached the outskirts of town, the first hints of dawn breaking over the horizon. Rachel collapsed onto the pavement, panting. Did we make it? Kyle turned, watching the flames consume Fairview. The creatures writhed in the inferno, their screams growing fainter. Dawson exhaled. We made it. Bill groaned, holding his side. Barely. The survivors sat in silence, watching the town die. Then Tommy spoke, his voice small. But what if it happened somewhere else? No one answered. Because deep down, they all knew this wasn't over. Not really. The night of blood would come again. Somewhere. Somehow. And next time, there might be no escape. End of story.